A nurse was hired to look after a millionaire in a delicate state. One day, when no one was around, she was terrified by what she saw. Sarah's life was a web of sacrifices. Every day, she woke up before the sun showed its face, put on her white uniform, and faced whatever came her way. It wasn't easy being a nurse in a public hospital. The routine was tough, but she had a big heart, one of those that can't be broken by anything. You know, the kind of person who, even when exhausted, still manages to smile at others? That was Sarah exactly. But not everything in her life was just hard work. There was also that old pain, buried deep in her soul, a wound that never quite healed. Years ago, her family had lost everything. They used to own a small convenience store in the neighborhood where they grew up, but something happened, something big and heavy, too much to bear. She always knew who was behind it, or at least thought she did. Michael, a name that echoed in her mind like a distant thunderclap. And then, one random morning, while hurriedly drinking coffee, the phone call came. It was a private health agency offering her a job. "It's urgent," they said. "We need someone experienced." And there she was, sitting in the back seat of a taxi, heading toward the most impressive mansion she'd ever seen. It looked like it came straight out of a movie, with enormous columns and windows, so clean they almost disappeared. When Sarah walked in, she was greeted by a stern-looking woman dressed head to toe in black. "Are you the new nurse?" the woman asked, not even trying to hide her tone of dissatisfaction. Sarah nodded in confirmation. She was taken to the master bedroom, and there he was, Michael, lying in bed, pale and connected to various machines. He looked fragile, almost unrecognizable, but she knew who he was. There was no way to forget that face. Michael was a man who amassed billions as if they were grains of sand. Everyone knew his name, his companies, his businesses, but few knew his dark side. Or maybe everyone knew, but chose to ignore it. To Sarah, he wasn't just a powerful businessman. He was the man who ruined her family, the man who made her parents lose everything, the man who forced her to drop out of college and start working at an early age. She took a deep breath. She had two options: refuse the job and move on, or accept it and use it to her advantage. Let's be honest here. Which choice would be more interesting? Of course, she stayed, but not because she needed the money. Not this time. This time, it was personal. The first few days were tense. Michael barely spoke. When he did open his mouth, it was to give short, curt orders. Water, more medicine, leave. He seemed to have no patience for anything, let alone for a nurse he probably saw as just another disposable employee. But Sarah was smart, observant. She quickly noticed that he wasn't invincible. Behind that mask of arrogance was someone vulnerable, someone fighting against something bigger than she could imagine. One day, while adjusting his medications, Sarah noticed something strange. An envelope half hidden under the sheets. She hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of her. Inside were documents, contracts, signed papers, names she immediately recognized. Among them, her parents' names. Her heart raced. This was proof of what she had always suspected. Michael hadn't just destroyed her family. He had done it with cold, calculated precision. But at the same time, something inside her began to shift. It wasn't hatred, at least not completely. It was complicated. She started seeing him differently. The way he stared out the window when he thought no one was looking. The way he sometimes murmured inaudible words in his sleep. Small things that made him seem less like the villain she imagined, and more like, well, like a person. One night, while changing his bandages, Sarah decided to test the waters. "Why are you like this?" she asked softly, almost as if she were talking to herself. Michael slowly opened his eyes, surprised to hear her voice. "Like what?" he replied with his usual coldness. "You know," she said, without breaking eye contact. "Cold, calculating, like nothing matters." He fell silent for a moment, as if thinking about what to say. "Maybe it's because I learned early on that the world isn't a kind place," he finally responded. "People only want what you can offer. And when you have nothing left to give," he trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging in the air. Sarah felt a pang in her chest. It wasn't the answer she expected. In fact, it was exactly the kind of thing she herself had thought many times. Maybe they had more in common than either of them would care to admit. Meanwhile, outside, the wind blew fiercely, swaying the trees as if they were dancing to an invisible melody. It was as if the universe was trying to warn that something big was about to happen, something that would change everything. Sarah couldn't get that conversation out of her head. Michael's words echoed inside her like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. "People only want what you can offer." It was a simple phrase, but it carried so much weight. She knew exactly what that meant. Growing up in a world where everything seemed to depend on how much money you had in your pocket. And now, here she was taking care of a man who represented everything wrong with that system. Or at least, that's what she had thought. But something changed that night. It wasn't a huge shift, the kind that happens all at once. It was more like a small crack in a solid wall. Sarah started questioning her own certainties. Was Michael really the monster she had painted in her mind? Or was he also a victim of something bigger? She decided to dig deeper, not because she wanted to justify him, but because she needed to understand. She needed to know just how responsible he was for what had happened to her family. So, when he was deeply asleep, she discreetly searched through the papers she found around the house. It felt wrong, even invasive, but Sarah didn't care. To her, this was a matter of emotional survival. She needed answers. That was how she found something she never expected. In a locked drawer, which she managed to open with a pen and a little patience, there was an old, time-worn folder. Inside were old documents, photographs, and letters. One of them immediately caught her attention. It was a handwritten letter, signed by someone she recognized instantly, her father. The handwriting was familiar, even after all these years. Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she read the words. Her father talked about a deal he had made with Michael years ago, a deal that, according to him, had been the only way to save the store from bankruptcy. But there was an important detail. Michael wasn't the only one involved. Other people, names Sarah didn't recognize, were also in on it. Powerful people with influence that went far beyond what she had imagined. That complicated everything. Up until now, Sarah had a clear vision of what had happened. Michael was the villain, period. But now she was starting to see that things weren't so simple. Maybe he had just been another piece on a much larger chessboard. Maybe he himself had been manipulated. But did that change anything? He was still responsible, wasn't he? After all, he had allowed it to happen. He had signed the papers, given the orders. No matter the circumstances, he had chosen the path that led to her family's downfall. As she wrestled with these thoughts, Sarah started noticing little details about Michael that she hadn't before, like how he sometimes stared at his phone as if waiting for a call that never came, or how he murmured in his sleep words she couldn't quite make out. He seemed to be carrying a heavy burden, something that went beyond the attempted murder that had left him in that bed. One day, while adjusting his medication, Sarah decided to take a risk. "Have you ever lost someone you loved?" she asked without looking at him. It was a direct question, maybe even a rude one, but she needed to know. Michael was silent for a moment. Yes, he finally answered. His voice was low, almost a whisper. I've lost many people. How was it? She pressed, surprised at her own boldness. He sighed, as if reliving painful memories. It was like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. You think you're in control, that you can protect the people you love. And then, suddenly, everything is gone. And you're left alone. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. Those words could have easily come from her own mouth. She knew that feeling. She knew what it was like to lose someone and feel like the whole world was crumbling around her. For a brief moment, she saw Michael not as the man who had destroyed her family, but as someone who had also lost so much. But that didn't mean she would forget what he had done. Far from it. In fact, that conversation only reinforced her determination. She needed to uncover the full truth, no matter the cost. And if that meant diving even deeper into Michael's dark past, then so be it. The following days were filled with tension. Sarah continued her search for answers, always careful not to raise suspicion. She began to realize that Michael trusted no one, not even the doctors who visited him regularly. He seemed to be surrounded by secrets, as if every word he spoke was calculated to hide something bigger. And then, one night, while he was sleeping, Sarah found something that would change everything. It was a journal hidden on a high shelf in his office. She hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won. As she flipped through the pages, she found entry after entry filled with detailed notes. Michael wrote about business, about people he considered enemies, about plans that seemed straight out of a spy movie. But there was something else, something that made her heart race. On one of the pages, he mentioned her parents' names, not as victims, but as pieces in a larger scheme. He admitted to using their store to cover up illegal transactions, but he also wrote that he had no choice, that other people had forced him into it, that he himself had been betrayed. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was more than she had expected to find, more than she was prepared to face, because now she no longer knew who the real villain of the story was. Outside, the sky was dark, covered with thick clouds that promised a storm. It was as if the universe was mirroring the storm of emotions inside her. Sarah knew she was about to step into a dangerous game, a game where nothing was as it seemed, and where every move could come at a high cost. Sarah was trapped in an emotional maze. Each page of Michael's journal was like a new door opening, revealing even darker and more confusing corridors. She wanted to hate him, needed to hate him, but the words he had written began to create cracks in the image she had of him. He wasn't just the man who had ruined her family. He was also someone who had been used, manipulated, maybe even betrayed. But did that change anything? To Sarah, the answer was clear. No. No matter the circumstances, Michael had chosen his path. He had allowed those illegal transactions to happen, even knowing the impact they would have on innocent people. He had signed the papers, given the orders, and now, years later, Sarah was determined to make him pay for it. She began crafting a plan. It wouldn't be quick or easy. It had to be carefully thought out, meticulously executed. But Sarah wasn't naive. She knew she had to keep up appearances while plotting her revenge. So, she continued caring for Michael as if nothing was happening. She changed his bandages, adjusted his medication, did everything exactly as she was supposed to. At least, that's what he thought. In reality, Sarah was manipulating small details. She adjusted the doses of his medication so that he would grow weaker, though not enough to raise suspicion. It was a dangerous game, and she knew it. One wrong move, and Michael could catch on. But she couldn't back down now. She was determined to make him feel the weight of his choices. Meanwhile, something unexpected began to happen. Michael, who had barely acknowledged her before, started to open up. Not much. Of course, he was still reserved, distant. But there were moments when he seemed to lower his guard. One night, as Sarah adjusted the pillows behind his back, he said something that caught her off guard. "You're different from the others," he murmured, almost as if speaking to himself. "Different how?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I don't know," he replied hesitantly. "You seem genuine." That took Sarah by surprise. She had expected suspicion, coldness, maybe even hostility. But not this. Not that almost vulnerable tone. For a moment, she felt a tightness in her chest. Was he starting to trust her? And if so, what did that mean for her plan? But Sarah couldn't afford to hesitate. She had a goal, and nothing would steer her off course. So, she continued acting as if nothing was happening. During the day, she was the dedicated nurse, always attentive to his needs. At night, when he slept, she searched through documents, looked for clues, tried to piece together the puzzle of Michael's past. That was how she found something she never expected. In a hidden drawer in his office, there was a collection of old photographs, pictures of Michael with people she didn't recognize. Men in suits, elegant women, all smiling as if celebrating something important. But there was something strange about the photos. Some had names written on the back, names she recognized immediately, names of people who had mysteriously disappeared in recent years, people who, according to the news, had been victims of accidents or unexplained suicides. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was more than she was prepared to face. Michael wasn't just a cold, calculating businessman. He was part of something much bigger, something far beyond anything she had imagined. But she couldn't stop now. She had gone too far to turn back. So, she continued with her plan, fine-tuning every detail. She worked to earn even more of his trust, talking about trivial things, sharing small stories from her own life. Michael seemed to enjoy these conversations. Sometimes he even smiled. A brief, almost imperceptible smile, but one that spoke volumes. One night, as she adjusted his medication, Michael asked a question that caught her off guard. "Why do you do this?" he asked, looking directly at her. "Do what?" Sarah replied, trying to stay calm. "This," he said, gesturing to the bandages, the medicine, everything. "You could be anywhere. Why choose to take care of me?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. She could feel the weight of the question, its depth, but she couldn't reveal the truth. So she chose her words carefully. "Because I believe everyone deserves a chance," she finally said. "Even people who make mistakes." Michael was silent for a moment, as if processing her words. Then he nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right," he murmured. That conversation left Sarah unsettled. She knew she was playing with fire. The closer she got to Michael, the harder it would be to keep her plan intact. But there was no turning back now. She was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The following days were tense. Sarah kept adjusting his medication, watching every change in Michael. He seemed weaker, more exhausted. But still, he kept fighting, as if determined to survive. And maybe that was exactly what unsettled her the most, because deep down, Sarah knew that Michael wasn't just a villain. He was human, with flaws and vulnerabilities. And that complicated everything. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the trees as if they were dancing to the rhythm of an invisible song. It was as if the universe was trying to warn her that something big was about to happen, something that would change everything. Sarah was walking on dangerous ground. Every step she took seemed to sink her deeper into a swamp of emotions and doubts. She knew her plan was working. Michael was getting weaker, more dependent on her. But at the same time, something inside her was beginning to stir. It was as if a small voice in the back of her mind was whispering, "Are you sure you're doing the right thing?" But she couldn't listen to that voice. Not now. She had come too far to turn back. So, she continued pretending to be the dedicated nurse while secretly adjusting his medications to further undermine his health. Yet the more time she spent with Michael, the harder it was to ignore his human side. One morning, as she adjusted the pillows to make him more comfortable, Michael said something that caught her completely off guard. He began looking out the window. "I used to think that money was everything. That power could solve any problem as long as you had enough resources." He paused, as if carefully choosing his words. "But then, I lost people I loved, and I realized that no matter how much I tried to buy solutions, some things simply have no price." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. Those words were all too familiar. She had also lost people she loved. She knew exactly what it was like to feel the ground disappear beneath her feet when someone important was gone. For a moment, she almost forgot who he was. She almost forgot that he was the man who had ruined her family. "What happened?" she asked before she could stop herself. Her voice came out soft, almost gentle. Michael hesitated, as if pondering whether or not he should continue. "My wife," he finally said. "She died a few years ago. An accident. I never managed to get over it." That was an unexpected blow. Sarah didn't know Michael had been married, much less that he had lost his wife. She had always seen him as someone cold, calculating, incapable of feeling real pain. But there he was, talking about a loss so deep that it still echoed in his voice. "She was special," he continued with a melancholic tone. "I wasn't the best husband, I admit. I was always busy, working too much. But she loved me, despite all my flaws. When she was gone, it was like a part of me had died with her." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She couldn't help but put herself in his place. She had also lost people she loved, her parents, her old life. And suddenly, she realized that they both carried deep wounds. Wounds that might never fully heal. But did that change anything? Michael was still responsible for what had happened to her family. He had still allowed those illegal transactions to destroy everything she knew. Or was he also a victim of something bigger? These thoughts began to haunt her. During the day, she continued to care for him, adjusting his medications as planned. But at night, when she was alone in her room, she found herself poring over the papers and photographs she had found in his office. Each document, each image seemed to tell a different story. A story in which Michael wasn't just the villain, but also a pawn in a much larger game. And then one night, while flipping through his diary again, Sarah found something that made her stop breathing for a moment. On one of the pages, there was a handwritten letter addressed to him. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, as if the writer had been in a hurry or nervous. The letter read, "Michael, I know you think you're protecting everyone, but you're wrong. They're going to use you until there's nothing left. You need to get out of this game before it's too late. I know you think you have no choice, but there's always a way out. Remember that." The letter wasn't signed, but Sarah immediately realized who had written it. Michael's wife. It was as if she had been trying to warn him about something big and dangerous, something he had ignored. That complicated everything. Until then, Sarah had seen Michael as someone who made conscious choices, who knew exactly what he was doing. But now, Now she was beginning to see that maybe he had also been manipulated. Maybe he didn't have as much freedom as it seemed. But did that justify what he had done? To Sarah, the answer was still clear: no. No matter the circumstances, Michael had chosen his path. He had allowed those illegal transactions to happen, even knowing the impact they would have on innocent people. He had signed the papers, given the orders, and now, years later, Sarah was determined to make him pay for it. But something inside her had started to change. She could no longer see him solely as a villain. He was human, with flaws and vulnerabilities. And that left her torn. On one hand, she wanted to continue her revenge plan, to make him feel the weight of the consequences of his choices. On the other hand, she was beginning to question whether revenge was truly the right path. One night, while adjusting his medication, Michael said something that made her stop breathing for a moment. He began looking directly at her. "Sometimes I think I deserve everything that's happening to me. Maybe it's my punishment for all the choices I've made." That was a direct hit to Sarah's heart. She hadn't expected to hear that. She hadn't expected him to admit something like that. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then she remembered her parents' faces, their tired smiles, the tears they shed when they lost everything. And she knew she couldn't give up. Not yet. Outside, the sky was dark, covered with thick clouds that promised a storm. It was as if the universe was reflecting the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Sarah knew she was about to step into an even more dangerous game, a game where nothing was as it seemed, and where every move could come at a high price. Sarah was at a breaking point. Every word Michael said, every revelation she uncovered, seemed to pull her in opposite directions. It was like being caught between two strong currents, one dragging her back to the past, to the pain and anger she felt for everything he had done to her family, and the other pulling her into the present, where she was beginning to see Michael not just as the villain she had always imagined, but as someone deeply wounded and perhaps even remorseful. But that didn't mean she could simply ignore what he had done. No matter the circumstances, Michael had chosen his path. He had allowed those illegal transactions to happen, knowing full well the devastating impact they would have on innocent people. And now, Sarah was determined to make him pay for it. Yet something inside her had begun to change. She could no longer see Michael only as a monster. He was human, with flaws and vulnerabilities. And that left her torn. On one hand, she wanted to continue her plan for revenge, to make him feel the weight of the consequences of his choices. On the other, she was beginning to question whether revenge was truly the right path. One night, while adjusting his medication, Michael said something that made her stop breathing for a moment. He began looking directly at her. "Sometimes I think I deserve everything that's happening to me. Maybe it's my punishment for all the choices I've made." That was a direct hit to Sarah's heart. She hadn't expected to hear that. She hadn't expected him to admit something like that. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then she remembered her parents' faces, their tired smiles, the tears they shed when they lost everything. And she knew she couldn't give up. Not yet. Still, something inside her was shifting. She could no longer see Michael as just a villain. He was human, with flaws and vulnerabilities. And that complicated everything. Then on a rainy morning, as she adjusted his pillows, Michael asked a question that caught her completely off guard. "Why do you do this?" he asked, looking directly at her. "Do what?" Sarah responded, trying to keep her composure. "This," he said, gesturing at the bandages, the medications. "Everything. You could be anywhere. Why did you choose to take care of me? Sarah hesitated for a moment. She could feel the weight of the question, its depth, but she couldn't reveal the truth. So she chose her words carefully. Because I believe everyone deserves a chance, she finally said. Even people who make mistakes. Michael was silent for a moment, as if processing what she had said. Then he nodded slowly. Maybe you're right, he murmured. That conversation unsettled Sarah. She knew she was playing with fire. The closer she got to Michael, the harder it would be to keep her plan intact. But there was no turning back now. She was determined to move forward, no matter the cost. The next few days were tense. Sarah continued adjusting the medications, watching every change in Michael. He seemed weaker, more tired, but still he kept fighting, as if determined to survive. And maybe that was exactly what troubled her, because deep down, Sarah knew Michael wasn't just a villain. He was human, with flaws and vulnerabilities, and that complicated everything. But then, something happened, something that would change everything. One night, as Sarah adjusted his medication, Michael suddenly stared at her with an expression she had never seen before. It was a mixture of anger, frustration, and something else, something that looked like understanding. I know what you're doing, he said, his voice firm but controlled. Sarah felt the blood freeze in her veins. What are you talking about? She asked, trying to stay calm. You think I don't notice? He continued, not looking away. The medication, the wrong doses. You're sabotaging me. Sarah felt her heart pounding. She knew there was no way to deny it. He had figured it out. But instead of panicking, she decided to face him. And if I am, she asked, defiant, do you think you don't deserve it? Michael was silent for a moment, as if considering his response. Then he took a deep breath. Maybe you're right, he finally said. But do you know the whole story? Do you know who really ruined your families? That question caught her off guard. What are you talking about? She asked, confused. Michael hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to continue. I wasn't the only one responsible, he finally said. There were others involved. People who forced me to do what I did. People who are still out there, free. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was more than she was prepared to face. Who are they? She asked, her voice trembling. Michael looked straight at her. If I tell you, will you help me expose them? That proposal left her stunned. He was offering an alliance, a chance for a revenge bigger than she had ever imagined. But could she trust him? Outside, the wind howled, shaking the trees as if they were dancing to the rhythm of an invisible song. It was as if the universe was trying to warn her that something big was about to happen, something that would change everything. Sarah was paralyzed. Michael's words echoed in her mind like distant thunder. He knew everything. The plan, the sabotage, the revenge she had been carefully orchestrating. But instead of anger or retaliation, he had made a proposal, an alliance. And it wasn't just any proposal. It was something that could change everything. You're telling me that other people were involved? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though her heart was racing. Who are they? Michael hesitated for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. Powerful people, he finally said. Much more powerful than me. They used me, Sarah, manipulated me into doing things that, well, things I never would have done on my own. That was hard to swallow. Until now, Sarah had seen Michael as the center of everything. The man who had ruined her family, the villain who deserved to pay for his crimes. But now he was saying there were others who might be even worse than him. Why should I believe you? She asked, skeptical. You've lied before. How do I know you're not doing it again? Michael sighed, as if he had expected that question. Because I have nothing left to lose, he replied with a sincerity she had never seen in him before. I've already lost everything. My wife, my health, my freedom. What else can they take from me? But you still have a chance to get back what was taken from you. Those words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. It was true. She still had something to lose. She still had hope, no matter how small. And maybe Michael was right. Maybe there was a way to expose the real culprits, to finally uncover the full truth about what had happened to her family. But trusting him? That was another story. Sarah knew she was walking on dangerous ground. Michael was cunning, calculating. He had betrayed so many people before. Why would it be different with her? Yet something inside her stirred. A small spark of curiosity, mixed with a healthy dose of suspicion. What do you want from me? She finally asked. Michael looked straight at her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Help, he said simply. I need your help to expose these people. Together, we can bring them down. But I need you to trust me, at least for now. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. This was a huge decision, perhaps the biggest she had ever made. On one hand, she wanted to stick to her original plan, to make Michael pay for what he had done. On the other, the idea of exposing the real culprits, of finally discovering the full truth about what had happened to her family, was too tempting to ignore. Why would I do this? She asked, still hesitant. Why should I help you? Michael was silent for a moment, as if weighing his response. Because you know you deserve justice, he finally said. And because deep down, we're both fighting the same enemy. That sentence hung in the air between them, heavy and full of meaning. Sarah knew he was right. No matter the circumstances, Michael was still part of the problem. But he was also part of the solution. And maybe, just maybe, they could work together to take down the real villains. Fine, she finally said. But if you betray me... I know, he interrupted with a faint, bitter smile. You'll destroy me, and I deserve it. That conversation left Sarah uneasy. She knew she was stepping into a dangerous game, where every move could come at a high cost. But she also knew she had no other choice. If she wanted justice, she had to move forward. In the following days, they began working together. Michael, though weakened, had access to valuable information, documents, contacts, secrets that could incriminate the people truly responsible for her family's downfall. Sarah, on the other hand, had the determination and courage needed to face whatever lay ahead. But it wasn't easy. Every step they took seemed to pull them deeper into a labyrinth of lies and betrayals. There were moments when Sarah questioned her decision, moments when she felt she was betraying her parents' memory by cooperating with Michael. But then she would remember their faces, the tears they shed when they lost everything, and she knew she had to keep going. One night, while searching through old documents in Michael's office, Sarah found something that took her breath away. It was a recording, a phone conversation between Michael and someone she recognized instantly, a name she never expected to hear, that of an influential politician, someone who frequently appeared in the news as a champion of family values and morality. The recording was clear. The politician was pressuring Michael, demanding that he sign the papers that would lead to her family's ruin. And Michael, despite his attempts to resist, eventually gave in. It confirmed everything he had said. He wasn't the only one responsible. There were others, much more powerful people behind it all. This is what we needed, Michael said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. With this, we can expose them all. But Sarah knew it wouldn't be that simple. Exposing people like that, Politicians, businessmen, public figures would be like taking on an entire army. They had resources, influence, ways to protect themselves. And, above all, they had a lot to lose. "This won't be easy," she finally said. "I know," Michael replied, his gaze serious. "But it's worth trying." Outside, the wind blew strong, shaking the trees as if they were dancing to the rhythm of an invisible song. It was as if the universe was trying to warn them that something big was about to happen, something that would change everything. Sarah and Michael were caught in a dangerous game where every move was like walking on eggshells. One wrong step, and everything could collapse. They knew they were dealing with powerful people, figures who wouldn't hesitate to crush them if they sensed any threat. But there was something even more terrifying than that: uncertainty. Sarah never knew for sure how far she could trust Michael. He had betrayed so many people before, so why would it be any different now? Still, she had no choice. She had to keep moving forward, even if the path was filled with traps. The recording they had found was a ticking time bomb in their hands. It was the proof they needed to expose the true culprits behind the downfall of Sarah's family. But using that information was like playing with fire. If they weren't careful, they could end up burned, or worse, eliminated. "This recording could get us into serious trouble," Michael said as he analyzed the file on the computer. "They'll know it was you." Sarah swallowed hard. She knew he was right. Exposing that influential politician would be like declaring war. But at the same time, this was her only chance to get justice. "We can't just stand by," she replied firmly. "They deserve to pay for what they did." Michael looked at her for a moment, as if trying to gauge her determination. Then he nodded slowly. "All right," he finally said, "but we need to be smart. We can't just throw this in their faces and expect them to fall." The two of them started crafting a plan. It wouldn't be quick or easy. They had to be meticulous, calculating. Every detail mattered. Michael, with his experience in business and manipulation, knew exactly how to pressure the right people at the right moments. Sarah, on the other hand, had the courage and determination needed to face whatever lay ahead. "First, we need to make sure no one knows we have this," Michael said, pointing at the file on the computer. "If they find out, we're dead." Sarah nodded. "So, what do we do?" "We start slow," he explained. "We'll release small bits of information, things that make them think we're investigating, but without revealing anything concrete. We'll make them nervous. Once they're worried enough, we strike." It made sense. It was like a chess game where every piece had a strategic role. Sarah knew she had to stay calm, even though she was trembling inside. She was about to go up against people who controlled empires, who had the power to destroy lives with a single phone call. In the following days, they began executing their plan. Sarah used her connections at the hospital, doctors, nurses, staff, to subtly spread rumors about an investigation involving the politician. Nothing too specific, just enough to spark curiosity. Michael, on the other hand, started making phone calls, talking to former business partners, hinting that something big was about to happen. The effect was almost immediate. Within days, Sarah noticed a shift in the hospital's atmosphere. People seemed more tense, as if they were expecting something. Even some of the most experienced doctors, who were usually indifferent to everything, appeared to be paying closer attention to the smallest details. But the real test came when Michael received a call. It was someone he had known for years, a man who worked directly for the politician. "What's going on?" the man asked, urgency in his voice. "We're hearing rumors." Michael remained calm. "Rumors?" he asked, feigning surprise. "What kind of rumors?" "Something about an investigation," the man replied. "They say you're involved." Michael chuckled, as if the idea was absurd. Investigation? I can barely get out of bed. Where are they getting these ideas? The man hesitated for a moment, as if trying to assess Michael's sincerity. Whatever you're planning, you'd better stop, he finally said. You know what could happen? That conversation made Michael tense, but it also confirmed what he already suspected. They were nervous, and nervousness was a weakness they could exploit. It's working, he told Sarah after hanging up. They're worried, but that doesn't mean we're safe, she replied, concern in her voice. They're going to try to stop us. I know, Michael said seriously, but now we're one step ahead. One night, while reviewing their plans, Sarah noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. A car was parked outside the mansion with its lights off. She couldn't see who was inside, but she knew it wasn't a coincidence. Someone was watching. Michael, she whispered, pulling the curtain to hide. We have company. He cautiously approached, peering through the window. They're here, he murmured, his voice grim. Sooner than I expected. What do we do now? Sarah asked, her heart racing. We keep going, he replied with a determination she had never seen in him before. We can't back down now. They know we're getting close. This is our chance to push them even harder. That night was long and tense. Sarah and Michael knew they were being watched, that every move they made was being monitored. But instead of panicking, they decided to use it to their advantage. They started sending coded messages, conversations that seemed innocent but contained subtle clues about what they were planning. And it worked. In the following days, the rumors intensified. The politician started appearing less in the news, as if he was trying to hide. Some of his companies came under investigation for alleged irregularities. It was as if the walls were closing in. But Sarah knew there was still a long road ahead. Exposing those powerful men wouldn't be easy. They had resources, influence, ways to protect themselves. And, above all, they had a lot to lose. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the trees as if they were dancing to an invisible melody. It was as if the universe was trying to warn them that something big was about to happen. Something that would change everything. Sarah and Michael were in a minefield, where every misstep could trigger an explosion capable of destroying everything they had built so far. They knew they were being watched. That car parked outside the mansion was just the beginning. But the real danger wasn't out there. It was closer than they imagined. Over the past few days, Sarah had begun to notice small, strange things. Phone calls that were abruptly cut off. Doors she was sure she had closed appearing slightly ajar. Even Michael's behavior seemed different, more distant, as if he was hiding something. She tried to ignore these signs, telling herself she was just tired, stressed. But deep down, something was bothering her, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Then, on a rainy morning, while adjusting Michael's medication, she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. He was on the phone again, but this time he was speaking softly, almost whispering. And though his back was turned to her, Sarah managed to catch a few words. She's getting suspicious. Yes, it's better this way. We can't take any risks. Her heart pounded. Who was she? Was he talking about her? Sarah felt a lump in her throat, but kept her composure. She needed to find out what was going on before jumping to conclusions. So she pretended to continue her work as usual, though her mind was racing. Later, when Michael finally hung up, Sarah decided to confront him. Who was that? She asked, trying to keep her voice neutral, as if it were just a casual question. Oh, just an old contact, he replied, too nonchalantly. Nothing important. But Sarah didn't believe him. Something was wrong. Something he wasn't telling her. She tried to push away her suspicions, telling herself she was being paranoid. After all, they were allies now, right? They had a common goal. Why would he betray her? And yet, that doubt began to grow inside her, like a seed planted in fertile soil. Every word Michael said, every look he gave her, seemed laden with hidden meaning. And then, the blow came. One night, while Sarah was reviewing the documents they had found together, she heard light footsteps coming from the hallway. It was late, and Michael should have been asleep. She hesitated for a moment, but decided to investigate. When she reached the main room, she saw something that made her breath catch. Michael was sitting at the table, a laptop open in front of him. On the screen, there was a clear message: "The recording is with me. What do you think you're going to achieve with this?" Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. He had betrayed her. He had handed everything over. The recording, the plan, everything they had fought for was about to be destroyed. "You betrayed me," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Michael turned slowly, wearing an expression she had never seen before, a mix of guilt and resignation. "I had no choice," he said, his tone almost apologetic. "They gave me an ultimatum. Either I cooperated or what?" Sarah demanded, anger rising in her voice. "They were going to kill you? Is that it? You'd rather save your own skin than do the right thing?" Michael lowered his eyes, unable to meet her gaze. "I told you, I had no choice." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind like thunder. She had always known Michael was calculating, that he would do anything to survive. But she had never imagined he would betray her, not after everything they had been through together. "You know what this means, don't you?" she asked, her voice filled with bitterness. "They're going to destroy us. They'll use that recording against us, and there won't be anything we can do about it." Michael was silent for a moment, as if weighing his next words. "I know," he finally said, "but there's still a chance. If we act fast, we can turn this around." "How?" Sarah asked, incredulous. "How do we turn this around when you handed everything over to them?" He hesitated for a moment, as if searching for a solution in his mind. "We have to expose everything now," he finally said. "Before they can use the recording against us, we have to reveal everything. Names, transactions, everything." It was madness, completely reckless. Exposing everything now would be like signing their own death sentences. But Sarah knew there was no other way. If they stood still, they were doomed anyway. "Fine," she said at last. "But if this goes wrong, you're the one paying the price." Michael nodded, his expression grim. "I know." The two of them began working frantically, gathering all the documents, all the evidence they had. They knew they had to act fast before their enemies used the recording to turn the game against them. But at the same time, they knew they were taking an enormous risk. One wrong move, and they were finished. Meanwhile, outside, the wind howled, shaking the trees as if they were dancing to an invisible melody. It was as if the universe was trying to warn them that something big was about to happen, something that would change everything. The air was heavy with tension, like a storm about to break. Sarah and Michael knew they were approaching the point of no return. Every second counted. Every move had to be carefully calculated. They had gathered everything they could: documents, recordings, enough evidence to shake the foundations of power of those who had manipulated them for so long. But exposing all of it to the world was like lighting a short fuse on a powder keg. The explosion would be inevitable. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Michael asked as he organized the last files on the laptop. His voice was low, but weighted. He knew this decision would change their lives forever, and not necessarily for the better. Sarah looked at him for a moment, her eyes reflecting a mix of anger, determination, and something deeper, perhaps even a hint of sadness. "It's not about what I want," she finally replied. "If we stand still, they'll destroy us. We're already in this up to our necks." Michael nodded, though his face remained tense. He understood what she meant. There was no more room to retreat. They had already gone too far, risked too much. Now, all that remained was to face the consequences, whatever they might be. Even so, there was something in the depths of Michael's eyes that unsettled Sarah. It was as if he was hiding something, some secret he had yet to reveal. She tried to ignore the feeling, telling herself she was just projecting her own distrust onto him. But deep down, she knew it wasn't paranoia. Something was wrong. "Let's get this over with," she finally said firmly. Before it's too late, the two began releasing the information. They used discrete channels, encrypted networks, anything that would ensure the message reached the public without being intercepted first. It was like throwing a stone into a still lake. The ripples spread quickly, reaching people who had never imagined themselves entangled in that web of corruption. At first, it seemed like the plan was working. The news started spreading. Investigative journalists began sniffing out something big. The first headlines appeared, mentioning powerful names, including the influential politician who had pressured Michael years ago. It was as if the ground was beginning to tremble beneath the feet of those who thought they were untouchable. But then, the counterattack came. One morning, when Sarah woke up, she found the mansion surrounded. Black cars, tinted windows, men dressed in suits, and dark sunglasses. It was like something out of a spy movie, but it was real. Very real. "It's done," Michael said, his voice grim. He stood by the window, watching the cars outside. "They're here." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She knew this moment would come, but she hadn't expected it to be so soon. "What do we do?" she asked, trying to stay calm, though her heart was pounding. Michael hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his next words. "I'll distract them," he finally said. "You need to get out of here. Take the evidence. If you can escape, there's still a chance to expose everything." "What?" Sarah exclaimed in disbelief. "Are you insane? They'll kill you, probably," he replied with a faint, bitter smile. "But someone has to pay the price. And, in the end, maybe I deserve it." Those words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She knew he was right, at least partly. Michael had made terrible mistakes, choices that had destroyed lives. But at the same time, he had also been used, manipulated. He wasn't just the villain she had always imagined. "No," she said firmly. "We go together, or we don't go at all." Michael looked at her for a moment, surprised. Then he slowly nodded. "All right," he said, resignation in his tone. "But don't say I didn't warn you." They slipped out through the side door, trying to avoid the men surrounding the mansion. It was like walking through a minefield, where every step could set off an explosion. Sarah's heart pounded, but she kept moving, determined not to leave Michael behind. They managed to reach Sarah's car, parked at a safe distance. But before they could take off, they heard the unmistakable sound of tires screeching on gravel. The black cars were closing in fast. "Go," Michael shouted, pushing her into the car. "I'll hold them off." "No," Sarah screamed, trying to pull him inside. "You're not staying behind." But it was too late. The cars were nearly upon them. Michael shoved Sarah into the driver's seat and slammed the door. "Go," he repeated urgently. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but she knew she had no choice. She started the car and hit the gas, feeling the weight of guilt and fear crushing her chest as she watched Michael being surrounded by the men in black. As she drove, Sarah realized she was crying. She wasn't sure why. Maybe for Michael, maybe for everything that had happened. But she knew it wasn't over yet. She had the evidence, the proof. And as long as she was still breathing, she would do whatever it took to expose the truth. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the trees as if they were dancing to an invisible song. It was as if the universe itself was warning that something big was about to happen, something that would change everything. Sarah drove, as if she were in a tunnel with the sound of the wind and the road echoing around her. Every mile she advanced seemed to take a part of her with it. Her anger, her pain, her vengeance. Michael had stayed behind, facing the men who now surrounded him alone. She knew that decision would come at a high cost, maybe even his life. But deep down, she also knew that he had chosen that path. He had decided to pay for what he had done, even if it meant sacrificing everything. As she drove, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. It wasn't complete peace, of course. There was still pain, still loss. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was doing something right, something bigger than herself. It was no longer about revenge or personal justice. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how painful it was. She stopped at a secluded gas station, far from the big cities, where no one would recognize her. With trembling hands, she called an investigative journalist who had reached out to her weeks before. He had already been interested in the story, but he lacked concrete evidence. Now, Sarah had everything she needed: documents, recordings, proof that could take down an empire of corruption. "Do you have something big?" the journalist asked, urgency in his voice. "I do," Sarah finally replied. "But you need to promise that you'll publish everything. No cuts, no edits." The man hesitated for a moment, but then agreed. "All right, send me the material." Sarah sent everything, every file, every recording. When she was done, she felt as if she had lifted a massive weight off her shoulders. She knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. The gears were already in motion, and there was no stopping them. In the following days, the news began to spread. Explosive headlines appeared in every newspaper and news site. The influential politician, once seen as a defender of morality, was exposed as the leader of a corruption scheme that had ruined countless lives. More names surfaced: businessmen, public figures, people who had always hidden behind masks of power and influence. But for Sarah, the most important thing wasn't the scandal itself. It was what it represented. It was proof that, no matter how powerful they were, no one was above the truth. No one was above justice. And then came the news she feared. Michael had been found critically injured after his confrontation with the men who had surrounded him. He was in critical condition, fighting for his life. Sarah heard about it in a brief news report, but she couldn't help feeling a pang of guilt. She had left him behind. She had fled while he faced everything alone. But at the same time, she knew Michael had made his choice. He had decided to stay, to face the consequences of his own mistakes. And in a way, that was a kind of redemption, a chance to do something right after so many years of making the wrong choices. One night, as she stared at the stars outside a small hotel where she was staying, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about her parents, their tired smiles, the tears they shed when they lost everything. She thought about Michael, the cold and calculating man she had met, but also the vulnerable man she had started to see throughout this journey. And she thought about herself, the woman filled with anger and pain at the beginning, and the woman who was now beginning to see a different future. That was when she realized something important. Revenge would never be enough. No matter how much she wanted to punish Michael, no matter how much she wanted to see the guilty pay for what they had done, it wouldn't bring back what she had lost. It wouldn't bring back her family, her old life. The only thing that truly mattered was moving forward, rebuilding, growing, finding a new purpose. The next day, Sarah decided to leave. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to start over. She left behind the city, the memories, the scars. She took only a small suitcase with some clothes and a notebook where she wrote her thoughts. It was time to move on. Before leaving, she visited the hospital where Michael was being treated. He was still unconscious, fighting for his life. Sarah stood by his bedside for a few minutes, watching him. Then, she placed a letter beside him. A letter explaining everything she had done, everything she had discovered. At the end, she wrote only one sentence. "The truth sets you free. I hope you find your peace." She walked out of the hospital without looking back. She knew that, regardless of what happened to Michael, he had already paid too high a price. Now it was up to him to decide what to do with the rest of his life. If he survived. Outside, the wind blew gently, as if the world itself was breathing a sigh of relief after so much chaos. Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't a naive hope, of course. She knew the world was still a difficult place, full of injustices and challenges. But she also knew that as long as there were people willing to fight for the truth, there would always be a chance for change. In the end, revenge may seem sweet, but it is forgiveness and compassion that bring true freedom. Rebuilding your life is more important than destroying someone else's. Sarah learned that no matter how painful the past is, the future can still be shaped by the choices we make today. Justice is not about punishing others, but about finding peace within yourself.